Yes.
Holmes?
Yes.
Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
All right. We move on to item G, a public workshop, the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan Update and associated environmental documents. Don't see a name on this one. We're going to start with you, David.
Start with me. Good morning, members of the Airport Land Use Commission. So today we're asking you to conduct a public workshop to obtain public input on proposed draft Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that covers Auburn Municipal Airport and Lincoln Regional Airport. And at the conclusion of today's presentation which will be approximately 20 minutes, and then after Q&A and you get public input, we're asking you to authorize the executive director to release the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for a 30-day public review period, as well as the two negative declarations and draft environmental studies for the Auburn and the Lincoln Airport Land Use Compatibility Plans. So with that, the way the presentation will kind of work today, we have an agenda for our presentation here. I will cover the background and a little bit about the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan update. At that point, I will turn it over to Miranda Thompson, who is our project manager from Mead & Hunt, who is the consulting firm that is working on the plan update and worked on the 2014 plan. And I believe even actually worked on the 2000 plan. I don't know if she goes that far back, but the firm did. And we will.
Nicely played, by the way.
What's that?
Well done.
Okay. Yeah, well, sometimes. And then we'll cover CEQA findings, and we'll then review the next steps, and then any questions and answers, questions from the board members, and then we would recommend that you open it up for public input. Okay, so yeah, you've all heard presentations from me in the past with respect to the Airport Land Use Commission, so many of you are very familiar with the role of the Airport Land Use Commission and the responsibilities. But for the benefit of the public that's viewing today or in the audience, the responsibility of the Airport Land Use Commission by statute is to protect the public health and safety and welfare of people that fly into the airports, as well as the people that are on the ground, in the vicinity of an airport. And our charge is to conduct what's called airport land use compatibility planning. That means we work with the local jurisdictions as well as the airport operator to ensure that land use planning that occurs around airports is compatible with the airport operations, and likewise airport operations are compatible with proposed land use plans in the vicinity of an airport. So we would then adopt an airport land use compatibility plan, and as appropriate, amend an airport land use compatibility plan. Amendments typically occur when master plans or airport layout plans are updated for particular airports, which is the case here. Another charge is to promote orderly development and minimize land use conflicts. And then we also review, it says here, certain local agency actions according to the plan that you all have adopted. These are discretionary actions, so ministerial type actions like a building permit review would not come before this body unless it's voluntarily referred to this body for review. And then lastly, we determine consistency, and there have been many consistency reviews over the past year with housing elements and safety elements, as well as major development projects. And so we've all been through those hearings, and so I think you're well versed with that process. Importantly, the Airport Land Use Commission has limitations, and these limitations are identified in state statute, the Public Utilities Code. So we have no authority over existing airport operations. So it's the airport operator that, in this case, City of Lincoln, City of Auburn, that are responsible for airport operations, and they work with the FAA because the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, controls airspace. Airspace is considered part of the federal domain. The Airport Land Use Commission has no authority over existing land uses. So our charge as a land use commission, airport land use commission, is looking at redevelopment of land as well as new development of land to make sure that those proposed changes are compatible with airport operations. So it's future-oriented in many ways. And we have no direct ability to implement the airport land use compatibility plan. The airport land use compatibility plan has a variety of criteria that deals with noise, safety, overflight, as well as airspace protection. Airspace protection is like height restrictions. The implementation occurs by the local jurisdictions. This is the way it was set up in state statute because local jurisdictions have the land use authority. And so as part of the land use authority, there will be later this fall, we will come back before the board recommending to you general plan consistency determinations for the cities of Auburn, Lincoln, and Placer County. And at that point in time, the local jurisdictions will implement the airport land use compatibility plan. And the only types of actions that we will see will be what I refer to as mandatory actions, mandatory because they're identified in state statute. Those are like general plan amendments, specific plan amendments, or rezones, because you're changing a land use in that regard. And so then we have to look at that from a perspective of compatibility.
So David, before you move on, just for the public, I think those last three bullet items are very important to keep in mind as we move to public comments. There are areas that we do have authority over and other areas that we do not. So while we're happy to listen to your comments, if the comment is perhaps noise related, something like that, it isn't an area that we have authority over. And so in the city of Lincoln, that would be the city, and the same here in Auburn. So,
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so I actually already covered local agency responsibility. So, you know, the one action here that I did not address is that in the instance when an airport land use commission makes a consistency determination, you know, within state law, it allows the local jurisdiction to override that airport land use commission action. And the override requires a supermajority vote. So that has occurred sometime in the past, you know, but not frequently. So it usually is a very controversial sort of step to go through. So as staff, we try to work things out at staff level and with applicants before you get to that particular point.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, David. If the council makes that decision to override, liability shifts.
Correct. Right. So yeah, the liability shifts to the jurisdiction. Now, just quickly, this is kind of like Airport Land Use Commission, Aviation Planning 101. So there's three sort of plans that we deal with here. You have airport plans and the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, and of course general plans, and which you're probably most familiar with. You know, being every jurisdiction has a general plan. So the geographic scope of an airport plan. So that's on airport property. You're dealing with the facilities with respect to the airport, and its purpose is to guide, you know, development of that airport, typically over a 20-year period. It's often referred to as a master plan, and then rather than periodic updates of the master plan, you'll see what are called airport layout plans, which are then submitted to the FAA for review, and those are used kind of to update the master plans. For an airport land use compatibility plan, you know, our geographic area is an airport influence area. And for each of these airports, it's approximately a 2-mile area surrounding the airport. And it's within that area that typically, like Placer County, will have a zoning designation called aircraft overflight. And so that encompasses the airport influence area. And so the purpose of the compatibility plan is to promote, you know, compatibility between land use and the airport. And then, of course, your general plan covers your entire city limits, and it guides land use development. And ultimately, when we do consistency between the compatibility plan and the general plan, the compatibility plan becomes kind of another element of the general plan in terms of looking at land use projects and development review. So, you know, lastly, you know, for the benefit of the public, you know, PCTPA, we were designated as the Airport Land Use Commission. This goes back to 1998, and our first plan was adopted in 2000, and we amended in 2014. The amendment in 2014 was due to master plan updates for the two airports, as well as a change in state guidelines, and so that was a significant update. Those of you who were on the board at that point in time can recall that that was a pretty big effort, and there was a lot of public input at that point in time. So now we're proposing a further update of the compatibility plan because Auburn and Lincoln airports have updated their airport layout plans. And with that, I will turn it over to Miranda Thompson, who will walk us through the airport land use compatibility plan update.
Thank you, David. Good morning, commissioners. So the scope for this ALUCP update was to focus on the airport land use compatibility plans for Auburn and Lincoln airports because of the updates to their airport layout plans. For Blue Canyon, we'll talk about it a little bit more, that was not purposely included in this ALUCP update because they have not changed their airport master plan or airport layout plan since the 2014 plan was approved by this commission. However, some of the revisions to the countywide policies would be applicable to Blue Canyon, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other focus area was to clarify certain ALUC policies. So since the 2014 plan has been adopted, questions have arose regarding the nuances or interpretations of some of the policies and criteria. So we worked with staff and the local agencies to provide clarification to those policies. We also focused on policy clarifications regarding how to address wildlife hazards, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then locally, there's been a movement towards streamlining infill development within the Placer County area, particularly around the jurisdictions, so the cities. And so we have identified some potential policies that are included in this proposed update. We also wanted to include some implementation tools to help ALUC staff and local jurisdictions to implement the compatibility policies of this plan. And lastly, we have been asked to look at the ALUC fee structure to determine if the review time required by staff is covered by the fees required by this commission. In accordance with the ALUC statutes, the Airport Land Use Commission establishes what is called an airport influence area, which David mentioned covers or addresses noise, airspace, overflight, and safety issues. But in establishing that airport influence area boundary, that needs to be done in coordination and consultation with the affected local jurisdictions. And to meet that objective of the statutes, we developed a project development team made up of airport and planning staff from Placer County, the cities of Auburn and Lincoln. We also had a planning representative from the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG. They also function as the Airport Land Use Commission. And we also included Caltrans Division of Aeronautics, obviously PCTPA staff, and then we were involved as the consultant. And the primary objective for the project development team was to obtain background information that would be used as the basis of this compatibility plan update. The team also provided input and guidance on the policy revisions. And they also were charged in keeping their respective local jurisdictions updated on the progress of the ALUCP update. Now, in terms of the policy clarifications, I mentioned that since the 2014 compatibility plan was adopted, there have been some questions regarding implementation of some of the criteria. So we worked closely with the project development team to identify those areas, and we provided some clarification. We included some additional examples. In terms of the procedural policies, we more clearly identified the types of projects that would be subject to review by either ALUC, the ALUC executive director, or the planning commission itself. We made some technical revisions. For example, in the current 2014 plan, we reference the Airport Land Use Commission secretary. We've replaced that terminology with the ALUC executive director to more appropriately reflect the status or the designation of the executive director for PCTPA. We also looked at the wildlife hazard policies. We worked on some special condition exceptions, primarily for infill development. But it's also important to note that while we made some revisions to the countywide policies, the criteria, the compatibility criteria in the 2014 plan has not changed in terms of the density limits or intensity limits applicable within each of the compatibility zones. So now we'll focus on Lincoln Regional Airport first and talk about the ALP changes in this 2020 ALP draft, or ALP that was approved by the city. So what you see, the image on the left side is the 2007 airport layout plan, which is the basis of the 2014 compatibility plan. And the trapezoidal shape that you see is called a runway protection zone. On the right side, you'll see that runway protection zone has expanded under the 2020 ALP. And the purpose of that expansion is to provide enhanced instrument approach procedures to that runway end. Now, the consequence of a larger runway protection zone is shown here. And you see the blue is representing what's reflected in the 2014 compatibility plan, and to reflect the 2020 airport layout plan, RPZ, you can see that that zone is expanded, and that's shown in the red. So again, the purpose of this update is to reflect this new airport layout plan drawing approved by the city of Lincoln. Now, the consequence of a larger runway protection zone means that there is going to be a larger Zone A. And Zone A does extend off airport property and encompasses 2 parcels that are currently unincorporated Placer County, but within the city's sphere of influence. All of the other compatibility zones stay the same. We've also looked at some special exception areas around Lincoln Municipal or Regional Airport. We brought forward the special exception for the wastewater treatment facility, which is located to the south, and we've developed a new special exception to account for the Placer County Conservation Plan or program, and we'll talk about the details of that in a bit. So, as I mentioned, new policies have been prepared to help implement the FAA's guidance on addressing wildlife hazards around airports. The 2014 plan simply points the reader to the FAA's advisory circular, which is used by airports that are federally obligated, meaning they take in federal funding, and therefore they are obligated to follow the criteria and guidance provided by the FAA. That's a 200-page document, and for implementation purposes, it's difficult for someone who doesn't understand that particular guidance how to implement it. So one of the requests of this commission and the executive director is to provide some more specific guidance as to how to interpret the FAA wildlife guidance to these specific airports. So what we've done is defined a new zone called the Wildlife Hazard Critical Zone, and within that zone, the FAA criteria would be applied. And essentially what it does is it limits any land use or land use features that would attract hazardous wildlife to the airport environs, namely birds. And within Zone A that we talked about, which reflects the runway protection zones, that is the most critical area. And within that area, we recommend prohibiting any land use features that would attract hazardous wildlife to that particular zone. So we're looking at ponds, open water, any high vegetation around such features that would allow for roosting and foraging by birds. We also define the type of criteria that would be applicable within the outer areas of this new hazard critical or wildlife hazard critical zone. And we worked very closely with the administrator of the Placer County Conservation Program and the local jurisdictions, for example, City of Lincoln, to develop these criteria. And we are happy to report that they are in agreement with the policies included in the proposed ALUCP update.
If I could just mention, I spoke with Greg McKenzie. Well, we have worked with Greg McKenzie quite extensively on development of these wildlife policies. And he couldn't be here today because he's got another meeting conflict dealing with federal officials, in terms of implementation of the PCCP. But he did say that, that I could say on his behalf that, we've worked cooperatively, and he's quite pleased with the effort in terms of where we started and where we are now with respect to wildlife policies that are being shown in the plan. And so I just add that.
Okay, thank you. And now we're moving over to Auburn. So here's a comparison of the two airport layout plans. The first one is dated 2012, and that is the basis of the 2014 compatibility plan. In that airport layout plan drawing, it did not show any proposed runway extensions. Under the 2019 airport layout plan drawing, it does show a runway extension. So the current length is 3,700 feet. And the proposal is to extend the runways at each end, so to the west and to the east, for an ultimate length of 4,300 feet. Now, what's important to know about these extensions is that it would not be used for landing of aircraft, but used for departures. So there's extra runway length that could be used by pilots to gain a little higher altitude over the developed areas.
So before you move on, that bottom picture, I use pictures, was really helpful to me. What it indicates is that on takeoff roll, you're going to use that additional length. But as you can see on the right, on landings, you're still coming over the threshold and landing on the numbers. You're not
Correct.
using that additional
So
length at
no
all.
changes in that regard for landing operations. With the proposal to extend the airport's single runway, there is a consequence in terms of what that means to the compatibility zones that are currently established in the 2014 plan. So this is a comparison of the 2014 compatibility zones with the proposal included in this ALUCP update. And we've shown the underlying land uses. So Zone B1 is expanding further west, and to the southwest, you can kind of see that that wedge to the southwest near Highway 49. And the reason for that particular sliver there of Zone B1 is currently the airport has a fly-friendly program where it requests pilots, when safe to do so, to avoid a straight-out departure to the west, and rather take a departure to the southwest so that they can avoid overflight of the adjacent mobile home park. So we've accounted for that fly-friendly program here in the modification to Zone B1 to help protect that particular flight corridor. There's also a consequence to Zone C2 and D because of airspace restrictions associated with the runway extension. So you'll see that the airport influence area boundary has expanded slightly to the west and to the east. Most of those uses that you see there in yellow are rural residential uses. Neither the current compatibility plan or the proposed compatibility plan places any restrictions on the density of residential uses within zones C2 or D. The primary concern in these outer areas of the airport influence area boundary is anything that's very tall, maybe 200 feet in height. So here we show the expanded zones. Zone A expands to reflect the runway protection zones, but those RPZs remain entirely on airport, and we've talked about the changes to zones B1 and C2 and D.
If I could add just on the bottom of the slide there as a note saying that Placer County will need to amend its aircraft overflight zoning because the airport influence area will expand. The zoning designation will need to expand to cover these additional areas that are now included in the airport influence area. And we work with the county staff, and they anticipate that once we do the Placer County consistency determination later this fall, that they'll initiate that zoning ordinance update, and it probably would be, say, spring of 2023 or midsummer 2023 before that would come before the Board of Supervisors. So,
thank you. We also included some special exception areas, and that's covered in the crosshatched areas in Zone C and D. So the Sutter Faith Hospital has a current exception included in the 2014 plan, but we are proposing 2 additional site exceptions. One to cover the Placer County Government Center, which this commission approved that development plan, and we're simply bringing forward that approval and reflecting that approval in this update. We also developed in coordination with Placer County and the City of Auburn new infill green zones. And there's 2 zones. The first one is located just east of Highway 49 and north of Bell Road, and it's called Infill Green Zone Mixed Use Residential. And then we have another zone west of Highway 49 called Infill Green Zone Multifamily Residential. Now, the purpose of this infill green zone is to recognize that Placer County Board of Supervisors adopted a resolution that would promote infill development within what they're calling infill green zones to provide more housing, to encourage electric vehicle trips, discourage people getting into their cars and driving to access different services and go shopping, etc. So we wanted to reflect that particular initiative for infill development, and the current compatibility plan prohibits multifamily residential in Zone C. This would be an exception, allowing multifamily residential within these designated infill green zones. The one that's defined as mixed-use residential would require that any future multifamily residential be associated with commercial industrial development. It has to be a mixed-use development. And then anything on the west side of 49, multifamily residential would be considered appropriate.
if I could just kind of hover on this slide just for a moment. So we've worked pretty extensively, during the housing element discussion, for Placer County with Shauna Purvines and Alex Fish from Placer County with respect to development of this Green Means Go sort of infill designation for the airport land use compatibility plan. Because the housing element was proposing to do infill within this area here and add multifamily to areas that the current compatibility plan doesn't allow. And so the compatibility plan here as proposed will, I think, allow a range of multifamily from 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre. Now, under the housing element that the county has proposed, they would like to go up to 30 units per acre. And what we show here in the plan for special condition exception would be that anything above 20 units per acre, it's a policy decision. It would have to come before this Airport Land Use Commission, and on a case-by-case basis, you would have to hear the argument, take the facts in, and make a policy decision as to whether or not you want to allow something greater than 20 dwelling units. And so that's the way it's kind of structured right now. The county staff are comfortable with that approach, and I believe the housing element that includes working with the ALUC to develop such approach. So we've worked quite closely over the past couple of months to get to this point.
So this particular slide just shows where those exception areas reside or proposed, and the uses or the colored blobs in red identify the potential housing sites within that infill green zone, which is shown here as a green boundary. So we've covered some of those areas, trying to keep away from zone B1 and discouraging any of those red land commercial uses or multifamily uses within zone B1 and encouraging them outside of that zone, for example, within zone C1. In terms of the wildlife hazard, same approach taken for Lincoln is applied here for Auburn Municipal Airport. We've defined a new wildlife hazard critical zone, which is counterminous with the proposed airport influence area. So all of the related wildlife hazard policies would apply within the airport influence area. In terms of the implementation toolbox, that was a specific task charged to us, and we've developed some tools to help ALUC staff and the local jurisdictions implement this plan. One of the tools includes flow charts, which identifies what the process is, what types of projects need to be forwarded to the commission, and which ones could be reviewed by the executive director. So those are included in the appendices of this proposed compatibility plan. So now we'll shift into the CEQA findings. So based on the requirement of the California Environmental Quality Act and the decision related to the Muzzy Ranch case, basically every compatibility plan requires an initial study, an evaluation of the potential impacts to the environment. Now, this is a regulatory document. It's not a construction, of a project. So the focus is very different. And essentially what we're looking at is, would this compatibility plan, if adopted by the commission, have an impact or conflict with any of the underlying land uses and conflict with the general plans in place by the local communities? It focuses on the potential displacement of housing because of the importance of housing within California and the needs. We have to look closely at each impacted parcel and determine if there would be any displacement of housing in those areas. So looking at Lincoln Regional Airport, we talked about the expansion of Zone A, and Zone A prohibits the development of any future residential dwellings. There are existing uses there, rural residential uses. 2 parcels are affected. One's about 5 acres in size, and the other is more than 10 acres in size. And with the proposal of this Zone A expansion, there's a potential to displace approximately 3 units within the county, and if we look at the city's specific plan, there's a potential displacement of 2 units. But when we look at the specifics of the parcels that are affected, the conclusion was that those displaced units could be accommodated elsewhere on the property and certainly elsewhere within the community and within the airport influence area. And therefore, it was determined that it would be a less than significant impact.
So when you say displaced, the existing uses are allowed, the residents, the structures are allowed.
Correct.
That's correct. So it's any future housing that would be proposed on these parcels would not be able to be located within Zone A. Now, the city's ALP indicates the city's intention to acquire avigation easements, and those easements could specify that the structures, a dwelling unit, would need to be located outside of that particular zone. In terms of the Auburn Municipal Airport, there is no housing displacement within Zone A because it remains entirely on airport property, nor are there any displacements within Zone C2 and D because there are no density limitations on residential uses within those particular zones. So the focus is really on Zone B1, and you can see there are several parcels identified for commercial use. And under the county's general plan and zoning ordinance, commercial uses could allow multifamily residential uses, and Zone B1 would prohibit multifamily residential. So when we calculated what the potential theoretic displacement would be, it was approximately up to 47 units. Looking at the housing element for Placer County, there are no sites identified, or these particular sites are not identified as future housing sites for their housing element and to achieve their regional housing need allocations. Plus, if we consider the infill green zones that are included as part of this ALUCP update that would allow multifamily residential, it would reduce or minimize that displacement potential. And for those reasons, we found that this is going to be a less than significant impact for these unincorporated areas within Zone B1. So the conclusion here for the environmental documentations and initial studies is that minor changes would be needed to the general plans and zoning ordinances and specific plans for Lincoln, Auburn, and Placer County. For Auburn, the zones have expanded. So, for example, the Placer County aircraft overflight zoning ordinance would need to reflect the larger set of zones. They would also need to include the new wildlife hazard policies. And for Lincoln, it would be the expansion of Zone A. In terms of the housing displacement, as I mentioned, there are some potential displacements, but both the county and the city of Lincoln have the ability to accommodate those potential displaced housing units elsewhere within the airport influence area and within the community. And for those reasons, there's the determination is that there's going to be a less than significant impact on the environment, and we're proposing filing a negative declaration for Lincoln and Auburn airports. For Blue Canyon Airport, because the countywide policy revisions are more technical in nature, and we are simply bringing forward the airport-specific policies in the current 2014 plan, we are proposing to file what is called a notice of exemption, that there is no impact to the areas within the Blue Canyon Airport influence area boundary.
So I'll cover next steps here, so as part of the wrap-up. So what we're ultimately asking you today is to authorize the release of the airport land use compatibility plan and the draft environmental documents. I emphasize draft, so they'll go through a 30-day review. Public will comment. I'm sure there'll be quite a bit of comment. We'll respond to those, and ultimately we'll be back before this board, hopefully in September. So in terms of public noticing, so we have this public workshop, as well as the 30-day period and 2 virtual workshops that will be held in July, were noticed on our website, and working with our consultant AIM, we're publishing through various social media. Of course, there are stakeholders for these airports, pilot associations, Lincoln has an airport committee, and of course, you all are stakeholders, planning commission members are stakeholders. So there have been interested citizens since 2014, and so, they've become my friends, and so I have their emails, and so they've been sent notices, and we published in the Auburn Journal, in the Lincoln Messenger, because we're required to publish in the newspaper within the airport influence area. And consistent with what we did in 2000 and 2014, we've mailed to all the property owners within the airport influence area. So we'll probably have people today comment because they received a public workshop notice. Those are about, right now, the county's grown, so we've mailed out 11,000 notices. So it's, quite a bit of people. We will conduct live public workshops for Auburn Municipal Airport, so specifically focused just on Auburn Airport on July 14th from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. That'll be a virtual workshop held through Zoom. You all will receive invites, if you wish to participate. Lincoln Airport will do on July 15th, the next day, from 6 to 7:30 p.m. And before leaving this page here, because the notice has gone out to property owners, you can imagine I've had probably a number of people who have called me and who have, so I spent probably the last week dealing with phone calls. And I just want to sum initially what people have expressed so that you just have that for benefit. People that primarily have called are from rural Lincoln and the Sheridan area with respect to Lincoln Airport. Also, people within the immediate vicinity of Auburn Airport, and then a number of folks who live within Christian Valley, which is, I guess, kind of northwest, of the airport. So generally, people, with respect to Auburn Airport, are concerned about noise, existing noise. And noise has been, from these residents' point of view, a long-standing issue. I mean, when I mean long-standing, I would say a 20 to a 30-year issue. And they feel frustrated that there isn't the mechanism in place to deal with that. And they want someone to do something. That's what government is for, and so they want government, to act and to fix it. There are some people who felt that the notice that went out was a little bit misleading because it talks about compatibility, but compatibility has been defined in terms of redevelopment and future development, but it's not compatible now because there's a noise issue. And so it's a fair argument, but as we noted that we don't have authority over existing land uses and airport operations. So we're somewhat constrained by state statute. And then, there are a number of people who are like, what the heck, who is PCTPA, and, who's the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, and you've all heard that, in other venues.
Oh, yeah.
And when you have county in the title, it's confusing because everybody thinks that we report to the Board of Supervisors and we're part of the county. And so you have to go through that explanation. And for many people, they just don't get it. They think in terms of cities, counties, and state government, federal government, and not a number of special district type or joint power agency type creations. And then, lastly, people said, I've received this notice, how does this affect me? And of course, those, you can point people to the map, and then once they get, what it's about, then they appear to understand it better. With that, if you go to our website, and if you receive the notice, I've encouraged everybody to do this on the website. There's a blue box that says if you received a notice, click on this box, and when you click on this box, you have two choices, Auburn Airport or Lincoln Airport. And then for Auburn Airport, you can go and you can look at the map, and you can look at the current compatibility zones, and then you can overlay what the future compatibility zones are. And then at the bottom of that, there's what the various cases are with respect to if your compatibility zone has changed, what that means to you as a property owner. And then, of course, people have the ability to submit comments via email, and there have been several people who have done that. So timeline here, we started this thing, the board actually, approved, Mead and Hunt's contract back last June, and, we've had a number of project development teams, through the fall and early spring here. We work closely with the staff of your jurisdictions because we've had housing element, safety element reviews that overlapped, which are, play an important role in the implementation of this plan. And so we have today's a public workshop, which is kind of a kickoff for the whole public review period. We'll hold virtual workshops in July, and as I indicated, we hope to be back before the board here in September, recommending adoption of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, as well as adoption of the environmental documents. And then late fall, and maybe even early spring, there'll be subsequent actions with respect to the fee structure, the general plan consistency determinations, and various other, technical project closeout type of activities. And I just briefly wanted to talk about the fee structure because it's been mentioned a couple of times. So for a long time, up till 2014, we collected a $35 fee to do reviews. And in 2014, we updated the fee structure. And so the fee structure at that point in time and that's in place now, probably covers about 50% of staff time. And so what we will come back for your consideration will be whether or not you want to more fully recover the costs of staff time. And so in that instance, it will be pretty apparent that the fees will increase. And so that will be something that you will need to weigh as part of policy deliberation later this fall. As part of that fee collection process, we're also proposing to streamline it because, these applications come in, sometimes in bunches, and sometimes there's long periods of no applications because it's subject to development, applications and where things are in the pipeline with respect to the cities and the counties. And so what we have worked with the jurisdictions is the ability for them to collect the fees. And then if they collect the fees, as they collect fees on all sorts of things when someone files an application, then they would periodically then, send that money over to PCTPA electronically, into our ALUC, checking account. And so, rather than us just, what I have found over the course of 6 years is I've become, in many instances, a fee collector. So because the application is submitted to the county or to the city, and then it's bumped over to us, and I go, okay, well, where's the fee? And they go, oh, okay, well, we'll need to get the fee. And then, of course, the applicant, he wants to move along, or she wants to move along, right? There's a process there. And we're supposed to complete our reviews in 14 days, and I don't have the fee, so the application isn't complete. So then I have to kind of get on the phone and become kind of a fee collector. And after a while, I thought that, in this age with all the technology we have, there's got to be a better way to be able to collect the fee and transmit the fee to us. And so we're working on that, and hopefully that will be put in place.
So I see the shifting of responsibility for fee collection going on here.
Yeah, that's been noted by the staffs, but generally they've been quite good about that. There's been a lot of humor associated with it, but generally they've been positive in that regard. And the county staff have actually been quite helpful in that regard. Not to say that the cities haven't, but the bigger, most of the fee collection occurs with the county. So, wrap up. We're recommending you authorize the executive director to release the airport land use compatibility plan and the associated draft environmental documents for a 30-day public review period, which starts tomorrow and goes to July 26th. And with that, thank you. I'd be glad to take any questions from the board. And if there are no questions, I would recommend that you take public input, first from those that are here within the audience, and then from there, those who are virtually online.
All right. Thank you both. Much appreciated.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Miranda and David, for your presentation. It's very easy to follow. So now we're going to give it out to the public for comment. how do you go about, do you send out more notices, or how's that going to be?
Well, the notice that we sent out was kind of encompassing in that it advertised this workshop, it advertised the 30-day public review period, and it advertised the 2 virtual workshops. And because that's a lot to crowd into a public notice, we refer everybody to one web link, and that's the ALUCP page. And so the notice says, the document will be available tomorrow,
Okay.
for review. So anybody that gets that notice, if they look at, the web link and go to the web link, everything that they need to find in terms of the next workshops as well as the plan availability will be there on that site.
So if someone calls me and wants to know what's going on, I can refer them to the web link?
To them, or if you want, you can have them just, refer them to me.
Oh, I'll come call you.
Yeah, yeah.
No problem.
I've spoken to a number of individuals, and so it's part of public responsibilities. Yeah.
He's got lots of time, he's not collecting fees anymore, so.
Well, I don't know about lots of time, but yeah, you can refer them to me.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I do. First of all, you mentioned that a neg deck would be issued for Auburn. Is that contingent upon the infill being included? Because of the expansion of the runway, you're going to impact the additional zones. So with that impact, you're going to, of course, have to offset those impacts. So it is therefore contingent upon inclusion of that infill, correct?
Good question. The initial study evaluates the impact to Zone B1 and those 3 commercial properties that could allow for multifamily residential development. The analysis, if we were just to include or just focus on those potential impacts of up to 47 dwelling units alone, the conclusion would be still that Placer County can still achieve its regional housing needs allocation requirement, and that yes, there would be potential displacement on those sites, but the housing element does not include those sites in their inventory. And for those reasons, there would be still a less than significant impact. But if we add in the proposal for the infill green zones, it minimizes that impact or less than significant determination even more.
Okay, so great, I appreciate that because I wasn't clear. So that certainly makes it a little easier. And that goes to my next area of question and maybe a little concern is, you mentioned compatibility a lot. And we speak to the concerns you receive from individuals today, which we had 3 great bullet points to start our discussion today that we have no control over.
Right.
And we can't really address some of those. But we can when we approve or when we move forward with this plan, what happens moving forward. And so compatibility-wise, of as much as 30 units per acre in such close proximity to an expanded runway, I'm a little concerned about relative to that being infill. Because again, 30 units per, and I understand that's not set, but that's a potential for 30 units per. So if you have something to add on that and you want to jump in on that, please do.
Well, I just want to clarify, so in the infill area, the green means go infill area. That special condition exception would allow up to 20 dwelling units per acre. County's housing element looks up to 30 dwelling units per acre. And up to the 20 dwelling units per acre, and we didn't really get into detail here, there's a number of criteria for that particular project, a 20-unit multifamily unit that would need to address in terms of safety issues. So there's construction sort of issues, or recommendations associated with any project that would go in that area to make it more compatible with respect to noise and safety. Now, the county staff asked us to go above 20 because their housing element says 30. And I said, we went back and forth and we said, ultimately, we can consider a proposal for 30, up to 30 units, but that proposal would need to be vetted by you all. So, as the executive director for a major project review, if a project came in at 19 dwelling units, we would review that project. And because the way the policy works in the plan right now, you've delegated that authority to the executive director. But anything that came above 20, we would have to come before this board. And so we would, bring the applicant's recommendation. If the county was supporting it, we bring, the county recommendations as to why 30 units on that particular parcel, was warranted. And of course, we would look at it and we would give you, our recommendation. And, there'd be public hearing, and you would take that input and you would have to make that decision pretty much on a case-by-case basis, within that infill area, special area. And so that's kind of how we were proposing it, because could not just on the face of it make an argument to go above 20 based on safety and noise issues.
And David, with the Green Means Go and that entire initiative, of course, we want to gain the greatest densities we can.
Right.
We also want the transit solutions. I don't believe people are going to be flying out of there because that's not a real easy and low-cost means for getting places out of the Auburn area. But that leads to another question I have, but I'll get there in just a second. But you brought up the 30 units, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Right.
And I
Okay.
did hear you.
Right.
I fortunately had the benefit of serving as a planning commissioner previously, so I get how that process
Okay.
works. But I also know how it works within the municipalities and the county when they say, well, we'd like the 30, so guess what's going to come forward are projects that contain and request that. So there's the potential for that to come forward. And compatibility-wise, when we talk a lot about compatibility, I do get a little concerned in a green zone that's at the end of a runway that's being expanded, the compatibility of that. So I just wanted to mention it, that, for me, that's an area, and I know you've got something on it. The other piece is and this is, Kathleen, I think your area of expertise, transit solutions in that area. What do we have available?
Sure. David also used to be our transit planner, so he can add to this.
I'm
if
sorry, David,
necessary.
I shouldn't leave you out of it.
No, all good. I like a little guest spot on David's item. So currently, Placer County Transit does serve the Highway 49 corridor, and part of the Placer County Government Center specific plan includes transit improvements to help that. Additionally, PCTPA staff is leading a reinventing transit effort with our operators across the county. So as the Green Means Go zones come online, the development starts to take place and get approved up at Placer County Government Center, it would certainly be something that we would look to support those denser uses up Highway 49.
Okay, so there would be, though, an expansion of current routes, because we don't have a current route through the airport area, do we?
We did at one point in time. There was, as part of an unmet transit needs hearing several years ago, where there was not an unmet transit needs finding. It was a voluntary agreement between Placer County Transit and the City of Auburn to operate a bus service up Loxley Lane because of the food closet that was there. But the food closet has since moved, and so that service has changed through that area.
So that route is no longer currently active?
I don't believe.
The airport area, the closer to the airport, is not currently being served by transit. However, that area of Highway 49, including some of the commercial uses and the government center, are served.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. So I wanted to turn it back to you, because you're our expert there.
Great, thank you. I wanted to respond to your question of the appropriateness of having multifamily off the ends of the runway within the infill green zone. So when this question or request came in from Placer County, we took a very close look at the risk level and potential noise impacts off the west end of the airport. And we looked to the guidance provided by Caltrans Division of Aeronautics in their statewide guidebook, or what we call the handbook, Airport Land Use Planning Handbook. And the proposed infill green zones are outside of the high-risk zones identified by Caltrans Division of Aeronautics. So It's still within an airport influence area, which means that there is still some potential for risk, but it's much lower than off the ends of the runway within the runway protection zones and what we would call zones B1. In terms of noise impacts, we looked at the airport's noise contours from the 2007 master plan, which has a 20-year time horizon, and the infill green zones are outside of the high impact zones of 60 CNEL, which is the community noise equivalent level. It's a policy metric that's used for determining whether or not residential uses are appropriate. The main concern is with overflight. So overflight is very subjective. One person may be very annoyed by an aircraft flying overhead, where the other ones are pointing, hey, look at that airplane, and calls out the type of jet that, or helicopter.
That would be me.
And so we also consider the overflight potential impacts because of the fly-friendly corridor that goes to the west. So we really try to keep any of the infill green zones outside of those higher impact zones and settled on these locations that's included in the compatibility plan. Multifamily residential is less susceptible to noise annoyance from aircraft overflights versus something less dense like rural residential uses, single family uses, et cetera.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Great. Sandy, I see your hand raised. Why don't you go ahead? There you go.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. So my question is pretty basic. You indicated that the extension is not for landing, only departures. Is that to minimize the effect of the noise and or safety?
This is Miranda. Good question. The proposal is to allow for additional takeoff run for aircraft departing to the west. There would be a nominal difference in the aircraft altitude over the developed areas. In terms of looking at that CNEL contour, the metric that's used for policy, I think it would be a very discrete, negligible difference in the actual noise contours. It's more just to provide some additional runway length to allow the aircraft to safely take off to the west or to the east. But the principal direction of flight is takeoffs to the west.
Okay, thank you. The other question just involves the special exception areas. I thought Rock Creek School was part of that. Is that not a special exception area?
Well, off the top of my head, I'd have to go back and check. So we will take a look at that.
Okay, you can just get back to me. And then finally, I do understand that this board has, it's out of the purview of this board in terms of the noise. But are there any suggestions to minimize the noise to address some of the concerns of the individuals who are impacted?
Yeah, earplugs.
Well, so the city, there's a brochure on the city's website that shows or identifies routes to take, flight patterns to take in terms of trying to not fly over particular residential areas. I think probably, and I've talked with your fire chief, Dave Spencer, about this a little bit. I think probably just there needs to be a little bit more communication, with the community with respect to how the airport operates, how the how the community has the ability to report concerns. On your website, you have a form that a community member can fill out and submit with respect to a noise complaint or a safety complaint. And, the city then responds back to that individual. But in this day and age, there are a lot of people that just want to just talk with somebody. versus necessarily going through a process of filling out a form and then waiting maybe 24 hours or 72 hours before somebody responds back. So probably looking at the avenue of communication. And, the city does a great job working with its pilots association and communicating, the concerns with respect to noise issues and proper flight, procedures and patterns. But I think probably there needs to be maybe a little bit more community outreach.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I was looking for an easy fix, like some sort of highway sound barrier we can buy together. But
Yeah.
no, I understand that. Thank you very much. That concludes my questions.
Okay.
All right. I see a raised hand, but I can't tell whether that's a member of the commission or not. I don't think so.
No, it's a member of the public.
Okay. One last round. Anyone from the commission? Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the infill zones, if a developer came to Placer County and wanted to put in a 30-unit per acre parcel on one of those infill zones, and the county proceeded with that, that would come to the Airport Land Use Commission for agreement. And if the Airport Land Use Commission denied it, the county would still have the ability to find overriding considerations to allow that use.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Just wanted to make sure. I don't want to see that happen because I would like to be friends with my friends in Auburn, the city of Auburn. But I just wanted to point that out, that there is overriding considerations that the Board of Supervisors can ultimately make if that.
As well as the two cities.
Yeah.
They have that ability too. But, Director Holmes, I'd like to, so as part of that process, the county, and I think the cities hold like pre-development meetings. And so I would be invited to that meeting because it would be, in the airport influence area, and I would be able to communicate. So you have an instance here where you're going to need to seek a special,
Yeah.
conditions exception. And you may recall last May, we had a hearing here on special conditions exception with respect to the Community Resource Recovery Facility. And so before that particular application went too far within the county planning process, and before the applicant spent a lot of money, going through that entitlement process, it was recommended that it come before this commission for a determination. And ultimately, that application was withdrawn, from the county entitlement process. Right. So hopefully, we would be able to address a potential inconsistency early in the process, and then ultimately it would be up to the applicant and, the jurisdiction to decide whether to move forward.
So you would be in those meetings because apparently you don't have enough to do.
Yeah.
He's not collecting fees anymore, so he's,
Let David do it.
So again, keep in mind the county would have the right to override, but that liability is going to shift to the county when they
Correct.
do so. And while I don't know, I haven't walked the ground that we're talking about here, but if you go 30 to the acre, I think you got to go 3 stories as well. So now you've got a height issue coming up.
And those are all built into the specific criteria that'll be shown in the plan, and so those would all need to be addressed. And of course, if someone felt otherwise, they would need to seek as part of their exception, and justify.
Right. All right. If there's nothing further up, I do have a raised hand from the commission.
I think.
Yeah, Dan Wilkins.
Yeah, go ahead,
Thanks,
Dan.
Paul. Thank you. Just a question on the liability topic. So my understanding is typically a government agency, just by virtue of approving something, so in this case, if a county were to take an action to override an inconsistency finding by the Airport Land Use Commission, and then approve a development in a air flight safety zone. My understanding is that government agencies don't typically accrue liability by virtue of approving something. So what I'm curious about, and it's probably, I'm not sure who the question is for, but what liability is it that really would exist for the government agency, and let's say it's Placer County approving something in an overflight zone that's deemed inconsistent with the airport land use plan? What is that liability really? So anyway, that's my question.
I think that's an excellent question for our legal counsel. I only spent 18 months in law school, so I think it would be not something that I would get into.
Deanne Gillick, our legal counsel, is online
Yeah.
if you'd like to.
Oh, okay. Deanne?
Hi, everyone. I'm here remotely listening in, and that is a great question. And sitting here right now, I don't know if I have a good answer to you, because you are right. The public agencies are immune for discretionary approvals. There are situations where you still have to be reasonable in implementing your plans, and you can have liability if a public agency's implementation of plans are not reasonable. So just sitting, without having, thought about this previously, that's one area that, perhaps that's where the statute shifts that liability and provides that background. So I think that, it's a good question, and let's look at that. And let's kind of get back to the commission so we understand now and for future decisions when we're acting as the Airport Land Use Commission, what that actually means.
Hello, commissioners. This is Ken Brody with Mead and Hunt.
Yeah.
Can I jump in on maybe answer a little bit of that question?
Yeah, please do,
Yes.
Ken.
Someone who does airports more than I
Yes.
do.
I
Yeah.
can at least speak with respect to what's in the ALUC statutes. And the way it's worded is it says that if an agency that is not the owner of an airport overrides the ALUC, then the agency that owns the airport would not be liable if anything should happen. So that's the first thing, because in this situation, two of the airports are city-owned, so if the city were to override the ALUC, the liability wouldn't change any. The other aspect of the statute is it does not say who would become liable. And to the best of my knowledge, in the over 50 years that ALUCs have existed, that has never gone to any kind of court or any kind of state attorney general opinion. So it basically just says who isn't liable if a agency not owning the airport were to override. But that's as far as the ALUC statutes go.
So on that, I'm glad that, since I'm not familiar with what liability might be, that there, isn't any case law. But on the first issue with city liability, as many of you know on public agencies, one of the ways that public agencies may be liable is dangerous condition of public property. So the manner in which the public agency owns and maintains its airport. So that does shift and shed light on the owner's potential liability or responsibility as owning that public property. So that is one statutory shift that fits in the statutes that we are familiar with as public agencies. So that helpful comment on that.
Yeah, certainly, and additionally, each of the airports, because they accept federal funds, has obligations to the FAA that not specifically having to do with liability, still speak to that issue in some manner.
So if I may just ask a follow-up. So so the scenario, and I'm just trying to understand what this liability topic really means. And so the scenario I think of is, okay, let's say the city of Auburn owns the airport. There's development in unincorporated Placer County. Unincorporated Placer County makes findings to override a airport land use compatibility conflict with a development, and they make findings for valid reasons. Housing's needed. There's a housing project that's beneficial to the region, as an example. and then an airplane crashes into the building at some point in the future, and then folks are looking for who to blame other than the pilot, I guess. And then they try to go back and say that the county should have never approved that project, and because the county approved a project in the flight safety zone, therefore the county should pay some money. I think what I just heard articulated is that if the county made that overriding consideration, what it would do is it would make the city, as the owner of the airport, less liable, but it's questionable as to whether it actually makes the county more liable, because the county is acting in good faith, making a discretionary decision for which it has immunity. And it sounds like it's a very kind of esoteric and maybe a somewhat theoretical topic that hasn't been litigated yet. And so maybe this is just a point of curiosity for me, but as it relates to what this really means to do an override. So I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment, but I'm curious, Deanne, if that line of logic I just went through, is that the typical line of logic we might run across in some kind of a very worst case scenario?
Yeah, that was well summarized and well stated as far as the distinction between the city public agency and with Ken Brody's knowledge, my lack of knowledge, and Ken being more familiar, saying there just isn't guidance on this and case law interpretation. As I said, maybe you can analyze it to the plans not being implemented and reasonableness, but I don't necessarily see that either. So I think that's a great summary, that it's an unknown.
Okay.
And would be a stretch of liability based upon those legal principles that we are familiar with.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And from a planning perspective, I agree as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
If I may suggest, Chair Joyner, that this will be a topic that we could probably spend quite a bit of time, particularly over coffee. But I think probably it might be something that we talk and then get back to the board.
I agree.
In some sort of communication from the executive director before
I agree, but
September.
That was actually a useful conversation for me as well, fleshing some of that out. So I do appreciate the question and the exploration of the question.
So we'll follow up.
All right, thank you. Any other members of the commission with a question before I open it up to the public? Seeing none? Any member of the public in the House that wishes to speak, please approach the podium.
My name's Stephen Stern, live in Auburn. I take full responsibility for buying my home 3 years ago. The realtor, when I asked about the airplanes flying overhead, the moment we drove the 140 miles each way to look at the house, said, "Oh, that's very unusual. I'm a pilot, that's rare." Well, we bought the house, lived there 3 years. I've called the FAA many times. I've called Dave at the city fire department, a wonderful man. Used to talk to Walt at the airport, a great guy. I had at least 50 videos on my phone of airplanes that I could spit at, flying over my property in my head. And I got a new phone, so I got rid of a lot of them. But I have some videos that are unreal, even of jets flying. It is nuts. It's all day long. I spend a lot of time outside. I'm retired. I've worked hard my whole life. We pay a lot in taxes to live here. This is crazy. It is so unsafe. And it is driving me crazy. I've worked my whole life to come here for this. And when they come in, I have noticed that several of them are cutting the engines, so it's very quiet. Even though they're low, they're quiet. But then there are others that are just, you gotta be kidding. And in the several of the videos, you hear my swear words, I apologize, because I can't believe that someone's doing that. It is so unsafe. And it's gotten worse. when they land, they go right over our house. And since Dave's been there, and I've complained many times, I've called him 20 times already, and I do have a life, it's just, it's unreal. And then when they take off, flying over my house, 20 times. What are you doing? Make the world a better place. Why are you doing that? All day long. And, I understand, I'm a retired small businessman. I realize commerce and maybe their schools and taking people on joyrides, but do you have to do that all day over my house? Anyway, we love Auburn, but the airport noise is crazy. We've just added $50,000-$60,000 worth of windows, double pane windows to our fairly new house already. And, my wife and I, we say incoming because it's just unreal. And thank you for your time. Sorry if I rambled, but I don't know what else to do here.
Understood. Thank you, David. Anyone else? Yes.
Chair Joyner, this
Yes.
is Aaron Hoyt here. I'm also monitoring the 3-minute time limit per speaker, and maybe after everyone within the board chambers has spoken, we'll move to those who have their hands raised in the virtual audience.
Yep.
Good morning. I'm Alex Fish with the Placer County Planning Services Division, and just wanted to take this opportunity to briefly describe the county staff's participation in the compatibility plan project development team, and also to thank David for his assistance and collaboration with this project. Also to thank Miranda as well as Ken Brody for their expert guidance throughout this process. So through our collaborative efforts, the county staff does believe that this team has achieved a comprehensive update that balances the needs for continued protection of the Lincoln and Auburn airports and the expansion of services at those airports with the needs of the county programs such as the Placer County Conservation Plan, which encompasses the area surrounding the Lincoln Airport, obviously, and the continued enhancement of housing, shopping, medical services in North Auburn. The county team included myself as well as other experts within the Community Development Resources Agency to provide guidance for specific technical issues. Those persons include Shauna Purvines. She's our Deputy Agency Director and oversees the housing team. Also had Senior Planner Patrick Dobbs, who assists Shauna on the housing programs and has assisted her with the housing element update as well as some ongoing zoning text amendments that are complementary to that effort. Angel Green, who assisted on matters pertaining to an update to the safety element, which you all heard at a meeting recently. And then Greg McKenzie, who is the program administrator of the Placer County Conservation Plan. You heard quite a bit about that today. So I'm pleased to share with the Commission that with the assistance of David, Miranda, and Ken, we were able to collaboratively resolve all areas of potential conflict. And in my opinion, the 2021 update balances protection of airspace and airport land use for the City of Lincoln and the City of Auburn with respective compatibility needs for land uses within unincorporated Placer County. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Anyone else in the chambers wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and go to those calling in.
Okay, Chair Joyner, the first person I'm going to unmute is Doug Marquand.
All right.
Doug, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Doug Marquand. Can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you for your time and thank you for allowing the public to speak on this important matter. I've been a resident of Auburn for about 26 years in the same home. And when we moved in, there really wasn't, you could spend your time outside and enjoy the outdoors and not be interrupted by airplanes. But now that has changed recently, and it's just like the earlier gentleman stated, it's very significant. It does have an impact on your ability to go outside. When I was doing work from home and doing Zoom calls, I couldn't do Zoom meetings out on my backyard because it was too noisy. I know I was talking, as a matter of fact, I was talking to Robert Zukash or something from the fire department about a complaint in my front yard with my neighbor. And we had to stop conversing. It was probably a 30-minute call, and we had to stop talking and wait for the plane to go by 6 times, perhaps. And I see, because you can go to software and get information on flights and planes, and it appears a lot of it is regarding the flight schools. And there's about 3 main schools. They have about 20 aircraft according to their websites. And when they're doing their touch and goes or just flying around, there'll be about 20 times an hour that they just fly consistently around. And their altitude is right at the FAA requirements of about 500 feet above ground level, which is about 1,700 feet. Well, if they want to be good neighbors, if they're going to go around and around and around, maybe they could go up a few hundred feet, maybe 2,200. I don't know. I don't know what that impact is on the plane to fly higher, but maybe that's an option to reduce some of the noise. I know that they like to see what's going on in people's backyards because it's quite apparent that they do like to do that, especially when we're in our hot tub. They seem to, I don't know, maybe they go a little lower. And that's nothing exciting to see, let me tell you. Also, I'm curious about the decibel levels because according to, I believe, the ALUCP, if I read it right, they recommend to have decibel levels around 60 decibels, no more than 65 to the ground level and 45 decibels inside the house. And it is much higher than that. The decibel levels are much higher. If you can speak to your neighbor or your family member in your backyard when a plane's going by, that doesn't bother me. And for the most part, the private singleton airplanes, even the Learjets and things of that nature, they go by and it's pretty quiet. They'll be respectful. They'll be good neighbors. But I hate to pick on the flight schools, but they're the ones that are going around and around and around and around and around repeatedly. And I mean, if they need to have time in flight, go somewhere else. I mean, go enjoy the canyons. Also, they're going inside of C2 zone. They're supposed to be going around, I believe, in zone C1, but they're consistently going outside of C1, which is into C2. C1 is kind of along Bell Road, or newer Bell Road. And so they kind of go right above Bell Road would be the farthest they would go, but it's not that case. They're taking it really wide, and that's increasing the impact on your neighborhoods.
Chair Joyner, we've hit our 3-minute mark.
Okay, well, thank you. I do appreciate your time, and good luck with this because I know it's a very challenging issue that you have to contend with the noise.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. So I do want to reiterate that with respect to noise, this body has no authority to address that at all. We're happy to listen to your comments and even pass them on, but there is no action that we could take that would improve that. So if we've got anyone else?
We have about 6 more hands raised. So I'm going to unmute Mary Posh. Go ahead and unmute your device. And my apologies for any incorrect pronunciations of last names.
Nope, thank you. That's better than most interpretations. Appreciate the opportunity to address this group. Understand that this board has some limited purview. At the same time, you are in the process of approving an update to the plan. And I want to draw this group's attention to some of the commitments that were outlined in the 2014 plan related to the Lincoln Regional Airport that have not been upheld. You know, this group is intended to look out for both, obviously, the broader interests of the citizens of Placer County. I would hope as part of that, it also reflects the rights of private landowners. In the 2014 plan, there were, when there was take involved in the limits of land use associated with expansion of areas of the Lincoln Airport, namely the runway protection zone. There was identification that there would be future navigation easements put in place. My family has one of those parcels that is directly affected by that and has had no contact by the airport or others. So moving forward with yet another plan, and this is partially to bring into attention to other landowners in the area that may be affected by this 2021 plan, that the commitments that were laid out in the project description and in the plan have not been met. And this board does have discretion in not necessarily approving or moving forward the 2021 plan. That is under your discretion. So appreciate the opportunity to address this board and hope that you will take that into consideration in your vote to ultimately to approve the 2021 plan.
All right, thank you, Mary. Mary, will you do me a favor? Separate and aside from this board, would you reach out to me at the City of Lincoln and maybe we can communicate about what you feel was not followed up on by the city, and I can ferret that out and see if there's anything we can do there.
That would be greatly appreciated, Paul.
You bet. Happy to do it. Who do we have next?
All right, the next individual I'm going to unmute is Joe M. Joe, go ahead and unmute your device.
Yes, very good. Thank you. I have been living in Auburn since 1994 and at Luther Road and Highway 49 since 2006. And I know you say you don't have any authority about the noise level, but somebody should take authority on this because the noise has drowned out conversations. You can't speak on your cell phone. You got to turn up your TVs inside your house because these airplanes don't have mufflers. And there's got to be something that somebody can do. And I've called the airport and the city and the county several times, and they just say, we'll look into it, and nobody does anything. I mean, it's a big problem. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Joe. Next.
Next, we have Heidi 1. And go ahead and unmute your device.
Yes, hi. Thank you for hearing my comments on this. I have been a resident of Christian Valley for 35 years. And when I moved here, it was very, very quiet. I realized the airport was there at the time, but it was extremely quiet here. And about 5 years later, I started hearing a lot of planes coming really, really low, right over the tops of the trees. And I started calling. Anyhow, to make a long story short, I have talked to the city, I have talked to the county. No one, and I understand that noise is not under the purview of this board. However, I really would ask that the people listening to these comments take into account that for the 30 years that I have been trying to get the noise issue addressed satisfactorily, it has not been addressed. And the people of Christian Valley have fallen through the cracks. And I'm sure that's true for many other people in the area, not just Christian Valley, but maybe Shadow Rock and the other areas around here too. I happen to be on the board of Christian Valley Community Service District. And right now we're addressing this as kind of an unofficial, we're mostly water and roads, but it's kind of an unofficial thing that we're addressing for the community, the noise issue from the planes. And I agree with the one of the other gentlemen that spoke previously mentioned the flight schools. Yes, they are a problem. Although I don't have time to always be going outside, taking a video of the planes because, I'm working, I'm doing other things, or I'm not here. But they are a problem. The touch and goes, they have no respect for their neighbors. They have no respect for our community and our right to peace and quiet, basically. And I want to say that I really appreciate the efforts of Dave Spencer with the city specifically, because I know he has tried to address the noise problem, but unfortunately it keeps falling through the cracks. And I really ask that this committee and the other people listening who are involved with the airport operations would look for an avenue to actually address the noise problem, so that there are some actual changes with how the airport operates, and so that it minimizes the noise on residents surrounding the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Next.
Okay, our next individual I'm going to unmute is Christina Meyer. Christina, go ahead and unmute your device.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christina Meyer, and I own a home off of Lincolnshire Circle in Lincoln. And this is not a noise question. I don't know if this is the correct forum. I jumped on a little late, but I was just curious, with the expansion of the Lincoln Airport, is this going to allow for military aircraft to come in and land and take off and do exercises like that? Out of curiosity, I was just wondering.
It should not, but Lincoln Airport is an emergency runway for Beale, so there is the potential of an emergency situation, whether we were making this change or not, for military aircraft to use that in an emergency. But other than that, no, it does not open. Perhaps an air show might have military aircraft coming in, but as a regular operational part of that, no.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all I had.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, the next individual to speak will be Steve Prosser. Go ahead and unmute yourself. And also, for those of you who may have phoned in on a cell phone or landline, you can also press *9 if you wanted to speak.
Good morning, Chair Joyner and members of the Commission. This is Steve Prosser, Community Development Director for the City of Lincoln. I'll make this short. I just wanted to show my appreciation to agency staff for the level of regional cooperation that was brought forward to bring this plan to you, and the support of their consultants. The city staff is supportive of the update to the airport land use compatibility plan in order to bring our runway protection zone into compliance with FAA regulations, and look forward to seeing a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. You heard Heidi's concern over navigation easements there in Lincoln. You and I will be talking about that sometime when you've got a little less on your plate, but sometime soon. So if you could look into that, I'd appreciate it, and we'll sit down and talk.
Already began. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Next.
Okay, Jeff Spencer, go ahead and unmute yourself. We have two additional callers after this.
Good morning, Chairman Joyner and Commission members and staff. One request I immediately have is to suspend a 3-minute rule, because I think I have some input that may be valuable to all the listeners and public commenters. And so if I could ask for that, please.
I can give you a little bit extra time, but...
Good. That's fine. I won't take a long time.
Mr. Chair, Jeff is actually the manager of this airport for the Auburn Fire Department.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
No, actually, I'm Caltrans Division of Aeronautics.
I'm sorry.
And
well,
that's okay. I'm actually the person who is your contact at Caltrans in the Division of Aeronautics for this plan.
All right. You just bought yourself a little more time. Go ahead.
For the folks who are concerned about the noise, I'm going to give you 2 emails. The FAA has a noise ombudsman that can be emailed at 9-A and all one word, noise ombudsman at FAA.gov. And there's also a voicemail you can leave. It's at area code 202-267-3521. They have some things on the FAA website, for the information they require. You can go ahead and look at noise complaints FAA, and it'll pull that up via Google. Another person at the state level is Philip Crimmins. He is our noise analyst at the Division of Aeronautics. So there's a couple of contacts for you guys to address that, because I agree, noise, especially as the airport has expanded and more use, we still want to be good neighbors. Going on now, I appreciate the Commission's consideration of an update to the ALUCP. Many of the ALUCPs in the state are very aged, and Placer County is to be commended for keeping up to date with their ALUCP and the airport's expansions. One note is on the wildlife policy. There are a lot of legislation and things that help to enhance habitat. For instance, one current bill, AB 614, is to help enhance the migrating bird habitats. However, in the bill, they don't consult with general aviation airports, only commercial airports. And so wildlife strikes, especially with general aviation aircraft, oftentimes end in an accident and perhaps even a fatality. So I appreciate that section. Want to also point out the economic importance of the airport. As we look forward to the future, there's unmanned aerial systems, there are air taxis, everything is starting to come into play. There's electric aircraft, especially with regional flights, making connections to other larger airports. These airports are going to be very important to the future and of economic development in your cities. One thing to bring up is the housing laws that are in play right now. Since the last update in 2014, the state has passed many housing laws, especially with auxiliary dwelling units, or what we call ADUs. The state has passed a law that these are ministerial approvals and have by right ability to build them and actually subdivide land. One thing the ALUC should consider is the cumulative effect in the land surrounding an airport, because it could become a conflict with the intensity of the land uses. Discretionary approval should be maintained for looking at any of those developments in the airport influence area. And then finally, one last note is on the liability question that was raised. And I'd point you to the PUC section 21678. What it is pointing out is that if an airport is operated by someone other than the public agency, and the public agency overrules, the airport operator is held to be not liable because of the public agency's ruling. The liability that is basically transferred is that in the case of an accident and a subsequent lawsuit, it is the public agency who is accepting that liability because of that overrule. I'm not a lawyer, but we've dealt a lot with overrules, especially in these recent days with the conflict of the housing that I just brought up. A lot of pressure on airports. The whole purpose of the State Aeronautics Act is to preserve the aviation system in California, and encroachment is one of those things that puts pressure on airports and closes down airports, which we've seen a lot of in the Sacramento region. But as I mentioned a little bit ago, these are very important economic drivers and important to regional mobility that is not on the surface transportation system. And with that, I'd be welcome to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Jeff. We have anyone else?
We have two more. I'm going to go to Michael Garabedian. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mike Garabedian. I'd like to have my email added to the email list. I guess that would make me number 11,001 or something like that. I want to talk about safety culture, something that started growing on me when I was 10 years old. My uncle was a commercial airline pilot, and I brought an accident to him, and he told me that every accident is caused by human error, so each Thanksgiving I brought a new one to him, and each time he explained where the human error was. And so we are potentially dealing with human error here in this process. So I would appreciate some more definition of that in the documents if it's not already there. And the prime example I know of was the Dreamliner 747 lithium battery ion hearings that the NTSB had a hearing on, and they had a panel there on safety culture. So there were different safety cultures, including marine and landed industries, and that was a real eye-opener about the different safety cultures that different organizations have. So it is very much possible to delve into what safety culture issues are here and how the risk is being looked at in that context. So I think it would be good to know on another point about the closings of airports, what leads to their closing and what causes their closing. Have some idea about the history of that in this region and other areas. At what point does a closure happen? What triggers that? What conditions bring it about? Here we have a county that is, Mr. Frisch certainly is part of that effort, as many of us are on one side or the other, rambunctious development. So the impact of that on the airports, in this case, is a major issue. I hope that would be part of this update, and look forward to being more involved in it. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Garabedian.
And our last speaker who is calling in by phone, please go ahead and unmute your phone and speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you. This is CJ McMurray, and I'm a homeowner in the Sullivan Ranch area. And I've been listening to the meeting as well as the people that have spoken. What I am concerned about, or I have a couple questions. In the 2014 plan, it does address the flight elevation, it addresses noise, the good neighbor policy. So I understand that you are not the people that want to listen to the complaints or can do anything about the complaints regarding the noise. I listened to Jeff speak about an email for the FAA, Jeff from Caltrans. Unfortunately, I did not get the whole email address, so I would like that.
We'll put it up on the
address.
website.
Okay. And then if you could please put the city and county people, their addresses, email addresses, or phone numbers up on your website regarding noise complaints, I would really appreciate
You bet. We can do that.
as well. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, CJ.
That's it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Chair Joyner, there are no more hands raised.
All right. Well, I do apologize. We're running long here, well into Sparta's time, but we'll try to get the meeting moving forward. We are being asked now that we've held the public workshop and taken public comments to authorize the executive director to release the draft airport land use compatibility plan update and associated environmental documents for a 30-day public review.
ALUCP moves.
What was that?
ALUCP moves.
Okay.
Okay,
Second.
Broadway second.
I think Brian got the second in.
He didn't state his name.
Oh, he didn't state his name, you're right.
doesn't follow Just the
gotta be
You're right,
prepared.
by default, it goes to the one who stated the name, so Broadway
Doesn't
gets
follow
the
the
second.
rules.
Sully.
Amara.
Yes.
Baker.
Aye.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris. Holmes.
Yes.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones, Wilkins,
Yes.
motion passes.
All right, thank you. We move on.